The crystal chandelier trembled above table 12 as Marcus Whitfield raised his voice for the third time that evening. His wife, Diane, sat beside him with her phone angled toward the young waitress, recording. Their teenage children, Preston and Olivia, slouched in their chairs with practiced indifference, scrolling through feeds they'd seen 100 times before. "I said, we want you to sing," Marcus repeated, his words slicing through the ambient music of Bella Notte, the upscale Italian restaurant on Fifth Avenue, where velvet curtains framed floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city's glittering skyline. "My daughter here says you used to perform somewhere. We're paying customers. Entertainment is part of the experience, isn't it?" Elena Vasquez stood perfectly still, her order pad pressed against her chest like a shield. The black uniform she wore, pressed and spotless despite 6 hours of service, seemed to weigh more with each passing second. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, revealing a face that could have graced opera house posters. Strong cheekbones, expressive eyes the color of aged mahogany, and a mouth that had once shaped arias in the most prestigious conservatories of Europe. "Sir, I appreciate the interest, but I'm here to serve your meal," Elena said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The accent that flavored her English, a blend of her native Argentina and years spent in Milan, had become something she tried to minimize during shifts. Customers tipped better when she sounded less foreign, as her manager had once suggested. Around them, the restaurant hummed with Friday evening energy. Couples leaned across candlelit tables. Business associates celebrated deals with bottles of wine that cost more than Elena's monthly rent. In the corner, a pianist played soft jazz, his fingers dancing across keys with mechanical precision, creating background ambiance that was meant to be heard but never truly listened to. If you're enjoying this story so far, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It really helps support more content like this, and it only takes a second of your time. "Oh, come on," Diane chimed in, her voice carrying the particular pitch of someone accustomed to getting her way. "Don't be modest. Olivia showed us your YouTube video from, what was it, 7 years ago? You were incredible. Just one song. We'll tip extra." Elena's stomach clenched. That video. She'd almost forgotten it existed, a recording from her final performance at Teatro alla Scala, her voice soaring through Puccini's Vici d'arte while the audience sat in rapt silence. That was before everything changed. "Please," Elena said quietly, "I have other tables to attend to. Can I bring you dessert menus?" Preston looked up from his phone for the first time, his eyes reflecting the bored cruelty of a 16-year-old who'd been given too much and asked for too little. "Dad's offering you money to sing. What's the problem? You think you're too good for us now?" The words hung in the air like smoke. At table 7, an elderly couple glanced over with concern. At the bar, James, the bartender who'd become Elena's closest friend in this city of 8 million strangers, caught her eye and mouthed, "You okay?" Elena wasn't okay. She hadn't been okay since the morning she'd woken in her Milan apartment to find her hand shaking so violently that she couldn't hold her espresso cup. The doctors had explained that essential tremor was progressive, manageable, but not curable. A neurological lottery she'd lost, despite never buying a ticket. Opera singers needed more than voices. They needed the physical control to command stages, to gesture with precision, to embody the drama they sang. Her condition had closed every door she'd spent 20 years prying open. "I'm not too good for anyone," Elena said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I'm just a waitress, doing my job." Marcus leaned back in his chair, a smile playing at his lips, the smile of a man who collected moments of control like other people collected stamps. "A waitress who was once a star." That's tragic, really. What happened? Couldn't I hack it in the big leagues? Something inside Elena crystallized then, hardening into a decision she couldn't fully name. Maybe it was exhaustion from 12-hour shifts that left her feet bleeding into her sensible shoes. Maybe it was the rent notice that had arrived that morning, printed in aggressive red letters. Maybe it was simply that she was tired of being small, of compressing herself into a space that could never contain what she'd once been. One song, she heard herself say, but I choose it. Diane clapped her hands together, phone still recording. Perfect. This is going to get so many views. Elena walked away from table 12, her legs moving with muscle memory toward the small server station tucked behind the kitchen doors. She could feel the weight of attention shifting in the restaurant, conversations pausing mid-sentence, forks lowering to plates, the collective breath of a room sensing something about to happen. James met her at the station, his weathered face creased with worry. At 53, he'd worked in restaurants since he was 16, supporting 2 kids through college on tips and the kind of patient dignity that Elena had come to admire. "You don't have to do this," he said. "Rich assholes come in here every night. Don't let them make you into a circus act."
"I'm not," Elena replied, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. She filled a glass with water, drinking slowly, feeling the liquid cool her throat. When was the last time she'd sung, truly sung, in front of people? Not the shower performances or the humming while she folded laundry in her studio apartment. Not the fragments of melody she sometimes released when she thought no one could hear, but the real thing, the full-bodied expression of music that had once defined her existence. 3 years since her final audition in Vienna, where she'd stood before a panel of directors and felt her hand betray her during a crucial gesture. They'd been kind but professional. "We're looking for someone with more stage presence." Opera speak for, "We noticed your disability and can't risk it." "Elena." The voice belonged to Marco, the restaurant's manager, a thin man with oil-slick hair and the perpetual expression of someone expecting disaster. "What's happening out there? Mr. Whitfield says you agreed to perform." "1 song," Elena confirmed, setting down her glass. "Is that a problem?" Marco's eyes darted between Elena and the dining room beyond the doors, where the ambient noise had shifted into something anticipatory. She could see him calculating the potential for viral marketing versus the risk of disrupting the carefully curated atmosphere that kept wealthy patrons returning. "Make it quick, and for God's sake, make it good. These people spend serious money here." Elena nodded and pushed through the kitchen doors back into the dining room. The pianist in the corner had stopped playing, his hands resting on the keys as he watched her approach the small, raised area where his baby grand sat. Not quite a stage, but elevated enough to provide sight lines across the restaurant. She didn't look at table 12 as she walked, didn't acknowledge the phones now raised in her direction, or the whispered conversations speculating about what was about to happen. Instead, she thought about her grandmother, Abuela Rosa, who had sung in the churches of Buenos Aires and had been the first to recognize the gift in Elena's childhood voice. "El canto es oración," she used to say. "Singing is prayer." The pianist looked at her questioningly. "What do you need?" "Nothing," Elena replied. "I won't need accompaniment." She stepped up beside the piano, her server's uniform suddenly feeling like a costume, like the disguise it had always been. The restaurant had gone almost completely silent now. She could hear the hiss of the kitchen behind her, the distant sound of traffic beyond the windows, her own heartbeat pulsing in her ears. Elena closed her eyes and found the breath, not the shallow breathing of service industry anxiety, but the deep, supported breath of a trained soprano. She felt it fill her diaphragm, expand her rib cage, ground her in the moment, and then she opened her mouth and sang. The aria she chose was O mio babbino caro, from Puccini's Gianni Schicchi, a piece she'd sung countless times, simple in its melody, but devastating in its emotional truth. A daughter pleading with her father, willing to throw herself into the Arno River if she cannot marry the man she loves. Every note carried the weight of longing, of desperation, of love that transcended reason. Her voice emerged like light breaking through clouds, pure, crystalline, impossibly powerful for someone who'd been invisible moments ago. The first phrase soared above the tables, and Elena felt the familiar sensation of her body becoming an instrument, every muscle and bone aligned in service of the sound. In the third measure, her right hand began to shake. She knew it would happen. The tremor always came when adrenaline spiked, when emotion ran high. But this time, she didn't try to hide it. She let her hand tremble at her side while her voice remained steady, a perfect counterpoint of control and vulnerability. At table 12, Diane's phone captured everything, but Marcus's smug smile had vanished from his face. Preston had set down his own phone, leaning forward with an expression approaching wonder. Olivia's eyes were wide, reflecting something she couldn't quite name, perhaps recognition of what true artistry looked like, or perhaps shame at what they demanded. Elena sang the plea, "Se mi vedessi andare in Ponte Vecchio per gettarmi in Arno," and the words carried every loss she'd accumulated. The career that had crumbled, the apartment in Milan she loved and lost, the future she had envisioned that had dissolved like morning mist, but also something else, the stubborn persistence of beauty, the refusal of music to be silenced by circumstance. The elderly couple at Cable 7 had stopped eating entirely. The woman's hand was pressed to her chest and tears tracked down her weathered cheeks. Her husband held her free hand across the table, his own eyes glistening in the candlelight. James stood near the bar, no longer even pretending to work. His face held an expression Elena had never seen before, something between joy and grief, recognition of a gift he'd known she possessed but had never witnessed in its full form. The aria's climax approached. "I would die of suffering and pain. Oh God, I would like to die." And Elena let the desperation flood through her. Not just the character's desperation, but her own. The anger at a body that had betrayed her, the exhaustion of being invisible, the loneliness of carrying beauty that no one wanted to see. Her voice cracked slightly on the highest note, not from lack of technique, but from the sheer weight of emotion. And somehow that imperfection made it more powerful, more human. The sound that emerged was both technically brilliant and utterly raw, a combination that professional performances rarely achieved because they were too calculated, too safe. As she sang the final phrases, "Babbo, pietà, pietà," Elena's hand shook so violently she had to grip it with the other to still it. But her voice never wavered. The last note hung in the air like a prayer, sustained longer than seemed possible, then finally released into silence. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. Then the restaurant exploded. Not with applause, that would come later. First came the gasps, the sharp intakes of breath from people who'd been struck by something they hadn't expected and couldn't fully process. The elderly woman at table 7 was openly weeping now, her husband's face buried in his napkin. At the bar, a businessman in an expensive suit stood with his mouth open, his conference call forgotten on the counter beside an untouched Manhattan. Elena opened her eyes, her own vision blurred with tears she hadn't realized were falling. She'd forgotten what this felt like. Not the performance itself, but the connection, the way music could reach strangers and extract something essential, something true. At table 12, Marcus Whitfield sat perfectly still, his earlier smugness replaced by something that looked almost like shame. Diane had lowered her phone, though it was still recording, capturing her own stunned expression. Preston's teenage armor had cracked completely. He was staring at Elena with undisguised awe. And Olivia, 17-year-old Olivia, who had found the video and started this entire chain of events, had tears streaming down her face. The applause, when it came, started slowly. The elderly man at table 7 rising to his feet with difficulty, his hands coming together in steady, deliberate claps. Then the businessman at the bar joined him, then others, a wave spreading through the restaurant until everyone was standing, even the kitchen staff who had emerged through the service doors to see what had caused the sudden silence. Elena stood beside the piano, her uniform damp with sweat, her treacherous hand still shaking at her side, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt seen. Not as a diagnosis or a disability or a cautionary tale about talent that couldn't survive reality's demands, but as herself, broken and beautiful, failed and still somehow triumphant. James reached her first, his arms wrapping her in a hug that felt like safety. "Jesus Christ, Elena, why didn't you tell me you could do that?" "I never asked." And they both laughed through their tears. Marco appeared next, his calculating expression transformed into something approaching genuine emotion. That was, "I don't even have words. Do you know what this could mean for the restaurant? For you?" But Elena wasn't listening to him. She was watching table 12, where the Whitfield family sat in various states of emotional collapse. Marcus had his face in his hands. Diane was staring at her phone screen as if trying to reconcile what she'd recorded with what she'd experienced. And the children, the bored, cruel children who had weaponized her past against her, looked utterly transformed. Elena walked toward them, her legs unsteady. The applause continued around her, but it felt distant now, like weather happening in some other season. When she reached their table, she placed both hands on its surface, one steady, one still trembling, and leaned forward. "You asked for entertainment. I hope you found it satisfactory." Marcus looked up, and Elena was startled to see actual tears on his face. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words seemed to cost him something. I don't know what I thought. That was unforgivable what we did, demanding that you perform like some kind of trained animal." "We didn't know," Olivia added, her voice small. "The video just said you were a singer. It didn't say... you're incredible, like actually incredible." "I know what the video said. I know what I was." "What happened?" Preston asked. The cruelty had left his voice, replaced by genuine curiosity. "Why are you here instead of, singing at the Met or something?" Elena held up her right hand, letting them see the tremor clearly. "Essential tremor. It doesn't affect my voice, but when your hand shakes during an audition, directors see liability." "That's not fair." Diane had set her phone down completely. "No, it's not. But fairness is a luxury, not a guarantee." The restaurant's noise was slowly returning to normal, conversations resuming, silverware clinking against plates, the pianist tentatively beginning a new song. But at table 12, a small pocket of transformation remained. "What can we do?" Marcus asked, "to make this right?" Elena considered the question. What could they do? Write her a check that would never erase the humiliation of being treated like a performing monkey? Apologize with words that couldn't restore the 3 years she'd lost to invisibility? She looked at these people, wealthy, powerful, accustomed to solving problems with money, and realized they genuinely wanted absolution. "Go home," she said finally. "Watch that video you recorded. Really watch it. And think about who you assume people are based on where you find them. Think about the stories hidden in everyone you dismiss." She turned to walk away, but Olivia's voice stopped her. "Wait, the video I found, the one from Milan, you were singing for thousands of people. The comments said you were going to be the next great soprano. What was that piece called, the one you sang there?" "Vici d'arte, from Tosca. I lived for art." "And tonight, what was tonight's piece?" O mio babbino caro, a daughter asking her father for mercy, for understanding, for the chance to live the life she chooses. Olivia nodded slowly, understanding passing across her young face. That's why you picked it. That's why I picked it. Elena walked back toward the server station, aware of eyes following her, of whispered conversations trying to make sense of what had just occurred. The rest of her shift passed in a blur, patrons stopping her to offer congratulations, phone numbers pressed into her palm by people claiming to know producers or agents or someone you really should meet. She collected them all with polite smiles and promises she knew she wouldn't keep. By the time the restaurant closed at 11, Elena's feet ached worse than usual, and the tremor in her hand had spread to a general exhaustion that made her bones feel liquid. She changed out of her uniform in the staff bathroom, pulling on jeans and an old sweater, transforming back into civilian Elena, invisible Elena, the one who rode the subway home to a studio apartment where the heat worked intermittently, and the walls were thin enough to share her neighbors' arguments. James was waiting for her by the back entrance, his coat already on. "Want company on the train?" "Always," she replied. They walked together through streets that never fully slept, past closed storefronts covered in security gates, and bodegas still glowing with fluorescent life. The November air bit at Elena's cheeks, carrying the smell of roasted nuts from a nearby cart and exhaust from idling taxis. "You gonna do anything with those numbers?" He nodded toward her bag where the collected business cards created a lump in the side pocket. "Probably not." "Why not?" Elena stopped walking, turning to face her friend. "Because I already lived that life. I know where it leads. Opera isn't just about having a good voice, it's about being the right package, the right age, the right image, being healthy, being reliable, being everything I'm not anymore." "That's bullshit," James said, with the bluntness of someone who'd earned the right. "You just sang one song and brought a whole restaurant to tears. That's not nothing." "It's not nothing," Elena agreed, "but it's not enough either." They reached the subway entrance, the stairs descending into the earth like a throat, swallowing the city's excess population. But before they could descend, Elena's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to find a text from an unknown number. "This is Diane Whitfield. I sent the video to my sister, who works in arts journalism. She wants to meet you. Please call her." Below the message was a contact, Catherine Reeves, senior editor, arts and culture, The New York Times. Elena stared at the screen until James gently took the phone from her hands and read it himself. "Holy shit." "It doesn't mean anything," Elena said, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "Probably just wants to write some human interest piece. Former opera singer reduced to waiting tables. They love that kind of story." "Or," James countered, handing her back her phone, "maybe it means everything. Maybe someone with actual influence saw what you can do." Elena slipped the phone back into her pocket, the weight of it suddenly unbearable. "I'm tired, James. Can we just go home?"
"Yeah," he said gently. "We can just go home." They descended into the subway, leaving behind the cold November night and entering the artificial warmth of underground tunnels, where trains screamed past and strangers pressed together in temporary, uncomfortable intimacy. Elena found a seat near the door, James standing above her with one hand on the overhead rail. As the train lurched forward, Elena closed her eyes and heard the aria again, not as she'd sung it, but as she'd first heard it decades ago, sitting in Abuela Rosa's kitchen while scratchy recordings played from an old radio. Her grandmother had been making empanadas, her hands dusted with flour, and when the soprano's voice had emerged from the speakers, she'd stopped everything to listen. "That's God speaking through human bodies," Abuela Rosa had said. "That's what angels sound like when they remember being human." Elena was 7 years old. She'd believed her grandmother absolutely. The train carried her through the dark, through stations that passed in flashes of light and platform crowds. through the underground geography of a city that contained multitudes but rarely stopped to witness them. And somewhere in that movement, in the rhythm of metal wheels on metal tracks, Elena felt something shift inside her. Not hope exactly, but perhaps its precursor. The possibility that tonight had been more than performance, more than survival. The possibility that she might sing again. Elena's studio apartment greeted her with its usual silence. The radiator clanked but produced no heat. The refrigerator hummed its off-key melody, and through the southern wall she could hear Mrs. Chen's television murmuring in Cantonese. She dropped her bag by the door, kicked off her shoes, and stood in the center of the 12 by 15-foot space that contained everything she owned in America. The room told the story of reduction. Once, in Milan, she lived in a sun-drenched apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, a practice room with acoustic paneling, closets full of performance gowns. Now, a twin bed pressed against one wall, a kitchenette that was more suggestion than function occupied another, and a small desk held her laptop and the scattered debris of a life trying to reassemble itself. But on the wall above her bed hung the one thing she had refused to abandon, a poster from her debut at La Scala 5 years ago. Elena Vasquez in Madame Butterfly, her face captured in three-quarter profile, her expression both vulnerable and defiant. Looking at it used to bring pain. Tonight it brought something else. Confusion, maybe, or the early tremors of what might become recognition. She changed into sweats and an old conservatory t-shirt, then sat at her desk and opened her laptop. The browser still had yesterday's tabs open, job listings, medical research about essential tremor, a language learning app where she was half-heartedly trying to improve her English. But tonight, she opened YouTube. The video took 3 seconds to find. Someone, probably Diane Whitfield, had already posted the restaurant footage. Opera singer working as waitress performs Omio Babbino Caro and stuns restaurant. Posted 2 hours ago, already it had 47,000 views. Elena clicked play with a trembling cursor. Watching herself was surreal. The camera caught her from the side, showing both her face and her shaking hand. The quality was surprisingly good. Smartphones had come a long way, and the audio captured every nuance of her voice, every fraction of vibrato. But what struck Elena most was her expression. She'd been so lost in the music that her face had become utterly transparent, every emotion visible like weather crossing an open plain. The comment section was already filling up. "I'm literally crying. This is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Why isn't she famous? That tremor in her hand, is she sick? This makes it even more powerful. Someone give this woman a recording contract immediately. The way that family looked ashamed at the end. Good, they should be." Elena scrolled through hundreds more, the strange mix of praise, speculation, and the performative emotion that the internet specialized in. But beneath the noise, she sensed something genuine. People responding not just to her voice, but to the visible struggle, the humanity of imperfection. Her phone rang and she nearly dropped it in surprise. The caller ID showed James. "You okay?" he asked without preamble. Define okay. The video's going viral. I've been watching the numbers climb. Elena, this is different from that old Milan performance. This one has a story people can't look away from. A story of humiliation.
A story of survival, James corrected. Look, I know you're scared, but that editor, Catherine Reeves, she's legitimate. I looked her up. She's written about mid-career classical musicians, about the economics of opera. She might actually understand. Elena stared at the poster above her bed. The woman in that image seemed like a stranger now. Someone who'd believed in meritocracy and perseverance, who'd thought talent and training would be enough. That woman had been naive. This woman, sitting in a cold studio apartment with swollen feet and a viral video, knew better. "I'll think about it," Elena said finally. "Don't think too long. These moments have a shelf life. After they hung up, Elena sat in the silence and let herself remember. Not just the performances, but the process. The years at the conservatory in Buenos Aires, waking at 5 to practice before classes. The scholarship to Milan, flying away from everything she knew with 2 suitcases and a heart full of terror and ambition. The language barriers, the cultural adjustments, the relentless competition where your worth was measured in high C's and callback offers. She remembered Maestro Domenico, her vocal coach in Milan, a 70-year-old man who'd trained 3 generations of singers and who'd seen something in Elena worth cultivating. "The voice is only the beginning," he used to say. "What makes a singer great is what they bring from life, from suffering, from joy. The technique opens the door, the soul walks through it." He'd been in the audience that final night at La Scala. Afterward, he'd come to her dressing room with tears in his eyes. "I have never heard you sing better," he'd said. "Whatever comes next, remember this night. Remember that you achieved your dream." 6 weeks later, her hand had started shaking.
Bread, apples, the sparse groceries of someone who ate to survive rather than enjoy. She passed people on the street, and none of them knew that millions were watching her sing on their phones, that her life was bifurcating into before and after. At 3, James texted, "Dinner at 9 tonight? Rosa's cooking and wants to meet the famous opera singer." Rosa was James's younger sister, a nurse who worked the night shift at Mount Sinai, and who Elena had met exactly twice, both times in passing. The invitation felt weighted with meaning. This was James bringing her into his family circle, acknowledging that something fundamental had shifted. "I'd love to," Elena replied. James lived in a rent-controlled apartment in Washington Heights that he'd inherited from his mother. 3 bedrooms that housed him, Rosa, and Rosa's 10-year-old daughter Maya, in a configuration of practical family interdependence that Elena envied. When she arrived at 7, the smell of arroz con pollo greeted her before anyone opened the door. Rosa answered, wiping her hands on an apron. She was 45, broad-shouldered and kind-faced, with James's same steady eyes. "The viral sensation arrives," she said, pulling Elena into a hug. "I've watched that video maybe 20 times. Made half my unit at the hospital watch it too." "Please tell me you're exaggerating." "I'm not. Come in. Maya wants your autograph." The apartment was warm chaos, lived-in furniture arranged around a television playing a telenovela, school projects scattered on the dining table, photographs covering every available wall space in a gallery of family history. Maya appeared from the hallway, a thin girl with braces and intelligent eyes, clutching a notebook. "Can you really sing like that whenever you want?" Maya asked without preamble. "When my voice is warmed up, yes." "Even in the shower?" "Especially in the shower. The acoustics are excellent." She considered this seriously. "I sing in the shower too. My mom says I'm going to wake the whole building." "Your mom might be right," Rosa called from the kitchen. "Elena, you drink wine? I've got a bottle that's been waiting for an occasion." They ate at the table squeezed into the kitchen, plates piled high with rice and chicken, conversation flowing with the ease of people who'd survived long enough to recognize kindred spirits. Rosa talked about her shift, the patients she couldn't save and the ones she could, the particular exhaustion of medical work that was never finished. Maya talked about her school project on immigration, how she was interviewing her family about coming to New York from Puerto Rico 3 generations ago. "What about you, Elena? When did you come here?" 3 years ago. From Italy, but originally from Argentina." "Why did you leave Argentina?" "To study music. I got a scholarship to a conservatory in Milan when I was 23. "And why did you leave Italy?" Rosa shot her daughter a warning look, but Elena held up her hand. "It's okay. I left because I got sick. Not sick exactly. I developed a condition that made it hard to perform opera, so I came here to start over. But you can still sing, so why aren't you performing? It was the child's question, direct, unburdened by adult understandings of institutional barriers and economic realities. But it was also the question Elena had been avoiding for 3 years. Because having a good voice isn't enough. Opera is a business. It requires certain things: reliability, marketability, the ability to physically embody roles. When you have a disability, even one that doesn't affect your voice, it makes companies nervous. That's stupid, Maya pronounced. Maya, Rosa warned. No, it's okay, Elena said. She's right, it is stupid. But it's also reality. James, who'd been quiet through dinner, finally spoke. Maybe that reality's changing, though. That video. People aren't just responding to the voice, they're responding to the whole story. The struggle visible in it. Struggle isn't marketable. Perfection is. Bullshit, Rosa said, then glanced at Maya. Sorry, mija. But Elena, perfection is boring. People connect with humanity, with imperfection. That's why your video is viral and not some polished recording from a professional performance. They talked late into the evening, eventually moving to the living room where Maya fell asleep against her mother's shoulder while the adults continued their conversation in hushed tones. Elena felt something loosening in her chest, the chronic tension of isolation beginning to release. Around 11, James walked her to the subway. The streets were quieter now, the nighttime version of the neighborhood emerging with a different energy. From a nearby apartment, salsa music drifted into the November air.
Thank you, Elena said, for tonight, for not treating me like I'm suddenly different. You're not different, James replied. You're just visible now. There's a difference. The subway ride home gave her time to think. Visible. That's what had changed. For 3 years, she'd been practicing invisibility, trying to take up minimal space, to pass through the world without drawing attention to her loss. But last night, forced into visibility by a cruel demand, she'd discovered something unexpected, that being seen, even in vulnerability, could be its own kind of power. When she reached her apartment, another email waited. This one from an address she didn't recognize, info@metropolitanoperahouse.org. Her heart stuttered. Dear Miss Vasquez, my name is Dr. Patricia Huang, and I'm the Director of Community Outreach for the Metropolitan Opera. I was forwarded your remarkable performance from last night, and I wanted to reach out personally. We're currently developing a new initiative focused on accessibility in opera, both for audiences and performers with disabilities. Your story represents exactly the kind of conversation we need to be having in this industry. I'd love to discuss potential opportunities, including our Emerging Artists program and some upcoming community performances. Would you be open to a meeting? Best regards, Patricia Huang. Elena read the email 5 times, looking for the catch. The Metropolitan Opera, the Met, one of the most prestigious opera houses in the world, and they were reaching out to her. Not because of her training or her past performances, but because of a viral video filmed by a woman who'd initially meant to humiliate her. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she opened her closet and pulled out the case she hadn't touched in over a year, her sheet music, carefully preserved in protective sleeves. She spread the scores across her bed. Puccini, Verdi, Mozart, Strauss. The ink was faded on some, annotated with notes in multiple languages from different teachers across different years. Each page held a memory. Here, the Countess's aria from The Marriage of Figaro that she'd sung for her conservatory jury. There, the letter scene from Eugene Onegin that had won her the scholarship to Milan. And this, Un bel dì vedremo, from Madame Butterfly, her La Scala debut, the performance that was supposed to launch everything. She ran her fingers over the notes, her right hand trembling slightly. But her left hand was steady, and she realized something. She'd been defining herself by what she'd lost instead of what remained. Her voice was still there,
Her training, her artistry, her understanding of music, all of it intact. Only her context had changed. Elena picked up her phone and typed 2 responses. First, to Catherine Reeves. Wednesday at 2 works perfectly. I look forward to meeting you. Then to Dr. Patricia Huang. Dr. Huang, thank you for reaching out. I'm surprised and honored by your interest. I would very much like to meet and discuss your initiative. I'm available this week if you have time. Sincerely, Elena Vasquez. She set the phone down and looked at her reflection in the darkened window. A 34-year-old woman in sweatpants, hair unblushed, living in a studio apartment that cost too much for too little. But also a soprano who'd sung at La Scala, who'd trained with masters, who'd just reminded herself and a restaurant full of strangers what beauty sounded like when it refused to be silenced. Sunday morning arrived with unexpected developments. Elena's phone rang at 8 a.m., far too early for weekend protocols. The caller ID showed Bellanotte. Elena, it's Marco. The manager's voice carried an unfamiliar warmth. I hope I'm not calling too early. Listen, we've been flooded with reservations. Everyone wants to eat at the restaurant where that video was filmed. Corporate called me at 7 this morning. They want to talk to you. Corporate? Bellanotte isn't independent. We're owned by a hospitality group. They're interested in making this into something. Maybe you perform regularly, special dinner and show events? They're talking significant money, Elena. She should have felt excitement. Instead, she felt a creeping unease. I'm a waitress, Marco, not a dinner theater act. I know, but think about it. You'd be performing, getting paid well, building exposure. It could be a stepping stone. To what? Becoming a novelty? The singing waitress? Marco's pause was telling. Just think about it. They want to meet with you tomorrow, 10 a.m. at the corporate office in Midtown. I'm texting you the address. After he hung up, Elena sat on her bed, feeling the world tilt slightly. Opportunities were emerging, but each one carried its own compromise. The corporate offer meant money, but risked turning her artistry into a spectacle. The Met meeting promised legitimacy, but might demand vulnerability she wasn't sure she could sustain. The newspaper article would tell her story, but would define her publicly in ways she couldn't control.
Her phone buzzed. James texting. Saw you have tomorrow off. Want to help me with something? Could use your opinion on a project. What kind of project? She replied. It's a surprise. Pick you up at 9? Elena agreed, grateful for the distraction. She spent the rest of Sunday trying to ignore the internet, which proved impossible. The video had surpassed 2 million views. Someone had created a compilation of reactions to Restaurant Opera Singer that had its own viral momentum. A music professor from Juilliard had posted a technical analysis of her performance, praising her breath control and emotional interpretation. But there were other reactions too. Comments questioning why she hadn't made it if she was so talented. Speculation that the tremor was fake, designed for sympathy. Trolls suggesting she was exploiting disability for attention. The internet's capacity for both beauty and cruelty existed in equal measure, and Elena found herself caught between them. That night, she pulled out her laptop and did something she hadn't done in months. She watched her old performances. Not the La Scala video that had started everything, but the earlier ones, when she'd been unknown and hungry and certain that talent plus work equaled success. Here she was, at 25, singing Musetta in La Bohème at a small theater in Naples. Her voice was greener then, less controlled, but the joy on her face was undeniable. There she was at 27, performing Zerlina in Don Giovanni, her growing technical mastery evident in every phrase. And here, at 29, the Madame Butterfly performance that had changed everything, her voice now fully mature, capable of power and delicacy, her stage presence commanding. She watched that younger self and felt a complicated mix of pride and grief. That woman had believed in linear progression, in the meritocratic promise of classical music. She hadn't yet learned that bodies could betray you, that institutions valued consistency over brilliance.
that the industry she loved had little room for complexity. But watching now, Elena also saw something else. The sheer love visible in her younger self's face. The way she lost herself in the music, became a vessel for something larger than herself. That capacity hadn't disappeared, it had just been buried under fear and shame. She closed the laptop and lay in the dark, listening to the building settle around her. Tomorrow, James's mysterious project. Tuesday, the corporate meeting she was already dreading. Wednesday, Catherine Reeves and whatever story would emerge from that conversation. Thursday, Dr. Huang, and the possibility of the Met, a possibility that still seemed unreal. Her life was accelerating, shifting from invisible stability into something she couldn't predict. And Elena, who'd spent 3 years trying to control every variable, realized she'd lost that control the moment she'd opened her mouth to sing. Monday morning, James arrived exactly at 9 in his 15-year-old Honda that somehow still ran despite looking held together by hope and duct tape. He was dressed casually, jeans and a thick sweater, and had 2 coffees in a carrying tray. "Where are we going?" Elena asked, sliding into the passenger seat. "You'll see. It's about a 40-minute drive." They headed north, leaving Manhattan's density behind for the spreading boroughs, then crossing into Westchester County. James played old salsa music from his youth, occasionally singing along with endearing lack of pitch. Elena watched the landscape transform through the window, urban grid giving way to suburbs, then to something approaching rural, trees still holding their last autumn leaves against the coming winter. Finally, James turned onto a narrow road that led to a cluster of buildings, a community center of some kind, modest but well-maintained. A sign read, Riverdale Arts Collective. "What is this?" Elena asked. "It's a place I've been volunteering for about 5 years. Arts education for kids from low-income families. Music, dance, theater, visual arts. They operate on a strushing budget, but the woman who runs it, Maureen, she's a force of nature. I told her about you." They walked inside to find a building humming with creative chaos. In one room, teenagers painted a mural. In another, a dance class was in session, bodies moving to rhythms Elena could feel through the floor, and from somewhere deeper in the building came the sound of voices singing, young, untrained, but enthusiastic.
A woman in her 60s emerged from an office, her gray hair wild around her face, her expression radiating intensity. "You must be Elena! James has told me about you. Well, he told me before the video. Now the whole world knows about you." "Maureen runs this place," James said. "Everything you see, she built from nothing." "From desperation, more like," Maureen corrected. 15 years ago, the county cut all arts funding for schools in this district. I was a music teacher, about to lose my job, so I started this instead. Space where kids could access arts education regardless of family income. We're funded by donations, grants, whatever we can cobble together. She led them through the building, pointing out various programs. The mural kids were part of a youth development initiative. The dancers were preparing for a community performance. And the voices Elena had heard belonged to a choir of middle schoolers, kids aged 11 to 14, who met twice a week. "Our choir director left 2 months ago," Maureen said, her matter-of-fact tone not quite hiding the underlying stress. "Took a better-paying job in the city. Can't blame her. We barely pay enough to survive on. I've been leading rehearsals myself, but I'm not a vocalist. These kids deserve better." Elena understood now why James had brought her. "You want me to teach them?" "I want you to show them what's possible," Maureen said. "Most of these kids have never seen live opera, never heard what the human voice can do when it's trained and unleashed. They're singing pop songs and musical theater, which is fine, but there's a whole world of music they don't know exists." They stopped outside the rehearsal room. Through the window, Elena could see 20 kids arranged in loose rows, chattering and laughing, their energy chaotic but alive. A piano sat in the corner, and someone had taped inspirational posters to the walls. "Music is life. Find your voice. Sing like nobody's listening." "I don't know if I can," Elena said quietly.
I haven't taught before, and my hand—" She held it up, showing the tremor that never fully disappeared. "Your hand doesn't sing," Maureen said simply. "Your voice does. And besides, these kids need to see someone who doesn't fit the perfect mold, someone who struggled and survived. That's a lesson more valuable than any technique." James touched Elena's shoulder gently. "No pressure. Just come meet them. See if it feels right." Maureen opened the door, and the chatter gradually quieted as the kids noticed the adults entering. Elena saw the usual middle school mixture: awkward bodies caught between childhood and adolescence, clothes that ranged from carefully chosen to clearly hand-me-downs, faces representing the community's diversity, expressions ranging from curious to guarded to utterly indifferent. "Everyone, this is Miss Vasquez. She's a professional opera singer, and she's going to spend some time with us today." A hand shot up, a girl with bright pink streaks in her dark hair. "Are you the lady from the viral video, the waitress who sang?" Elena felt every eye focus on her with new intensity. "Yes, that was me." "That was so cool," another student said. "You made those rich people cry." "The music did that," Elena corrected. "I was just the messenger." "Can you sing for us?" This from a boy in the back, his voice carrying equal parts challenge and hope. Elena looked at James, who gave her an encouraging nod. She looked at Maureen, who simply waited, and she looked at the kids, 20 young faces holding expectations she wasn't sure she could meet. "What have you been working on?" Maureen handed her sheet music, a simplified arrangement of Seasons of Love from Rent. A good song, emotional and within their range, but Elena could see immediately where they'd struggle without proper guidance. The breath marks were in the wrong places, the dynamics were suggested but not explained, the phrasing didn't support the lyrical meaning. "Let's hear what you've got," Elena said. They sang, and it was exactly what she expected. Enthusiastic, but technically messy. They were rushing through phrases, not supporting their sound, singing from their throats instead of their diaphragms. But underneath the rough execution, there was something genuine. These kids were singing because they wanted to, not because they had to. That mattered. When they finished, Elena stepped forward. "That was wonderful. You have energy and commitment. Now let me show you what happens when we add technique to passion."
She spent the next hour teaching them basics, breath support, posture, vowel shapes, the difference between singing and shouting. She demonstrated phrases, then had them repeat. She broke down difficult passages into manageable pieces, and slowly, incrementally, she heard them improve. The transformation wasn't dramatic. They were still middle schoolers with untrained voices. But by the end of the hour, they were singing with more control, more awareness of what their bodies were doing. And their faces had changed too, lit with the discovery that they were capable of more than they'd realized. "One more thing," Elena said as their time wound down. "I want to show you something different. This is an aria from an opera called La Bohème. It's called Quando me muo, and it's sung by a character named Musetta, a young woman who knows exactly how attractive she is and isn't afraid to use it. Listen to how the music matches her confidence." She sang the flirtatious, playful aria without full voice. This wasn't a performance, just a demonstration. But even at half volume, the kids were transfixed. She could see them processing the idea that voices could do this, that music could contain this much personality and drama. When she finished, the pink-haired girl said, "That's not like anything I've ever heard." "That's opera," Elena replied. "It's theater and music combined. It's about using your voice to become someone else, to tell stories that matter." A boy with glasses raised his hand tentatively. "Could we learn to sing like that?"
With training, time, and practice? Absolutely. Your voices are still developing. In a few years, some of you might discover you have operatic potential. But even if you don't, you can learn to appreciate it, to understand it. Music isn't just about performing. It's about listening, understanding, feeling. After the class ended and the kids dispersed to their various homes, Elena sat with Maureen and James in the small office that served as administrative headquarters. Maureen made tea on a hot plate, while James sprawled in a chair that had seen better decades. "So," Maureen asked, handing Elena a chipped mug, "what did you think?" "I think they're wonderful. Raw, but wonderful. They want to learn." "Would you consider working with them regularly? I can't pay much, maybe $50 per session. I know that's insultingly low for someone of your training." Elena thought about the corporate offer, the potential Met opportunity, the various paths now opening before her. $50 was nothing compared to what she might earn from dinner theater performances or potential concert bookings. But watching those kids discover what their voices could do, that had stirred something in her that transcended economics.
Tuesday morning, Elena dressed carefully for the corporate meeting. A simple black dress that looked professional without trying too hard, low heels that wouldn't advertise the pain in her feet, minimal jewelry. She studied herself in the mirror and saw someone caught between identities, not quite the opera singer she'd been, not entirely the waitress she'd become, not yet whatever she might be next. The corporate office occupied 3 floors of a midtown high-rise, all glass and steel and the aggressive minimalism that signaled wealth without warmth. Elena gave her name to the receptionist and waited in a lobby where the chairs probably cost more than her monthly rent. Marco appeared after 15 minutes, looking uncomfortable in his pressed shirt and tie. "They're ready for you. Conference room B." "Elena, just try to be open-minded, okay?" The conference room overlooked the city from the 42nd floor, Manhattan spreading below like a promise. 4 people waited at a long table, 2 men in expensive suits, a woman with severe glasses and an iPad, and another woman whose relaxed posture suggested she was the person who actually made decisions. "Miss Vasquez, thank you for coming." The relaxed woman stood, offering her hand. "I'm Jennifer Hartwell, Director of Brand Development for Hartwell Hospitality Group. These are my colleagues, Michael Chen, our CFO, David Park, Director of Operations, and Simone Laurent, our Marketing Director." They all shook hands, and Elena noticed how each person's gaze lingered momentarily on her right hand, assessing the tremor before deciding whether to acknowledge it. Only Jennifer maintained eye contact without that flicker of curiosity. Elena Vasquez sits in the corporate offices of Bellinote, facing an offer that should feel like salvation, but tastes like compromise. The restaurant's management team, Jennifer, Michael, David, and Simone, present their proposal with slick professionalism. Evenings with Elena, a twice-weekly dinner performance series. The numbers are staggering: $80,000 base salary plus ticket percentage points, projecting 6 figures in the first year. It's more money than she earned even at the peak of her opera career in Milan, exponentially more than she's seen in 3 years of waitressing. But the details make her stomach tighten. They envision opera meets dinner theater, 30 to 40-minute sets mixing classical arias with accessible pieces, musical theater numbers, Italian and Spanish songs. They'd market her as the hidden gem discovered by our discerning clientele. The social media analytics flash across Simone's iPad, reservations up 400%, hundreds of thousands of engagement metrics, overwhelmingly positive sentiment. Elena's viral moment has become their business opportunity. "So, I'd be entertainment while people eat?" Elena says, tasting bitterness in her own words. Jennifer counters with compassionate pragmatism.
Opera houses are closing, classical audiences aging out, traditional paths narrowing. What they offer is a chance to actually perform, to reach people who would never enter an opera house. But Elena hears the truth beneath the pitch. She'd be diminished, background ambiance to osso buco and conversation, her 20 years of training reduced to dinner accompaniment. The trap reveals itself in the contract details, a 2-year exclusive agreement giving Bellinote rights to her performances throughout New York Metro. They'd control her repertoire, approve her choices, own not just her performances, but her potential. Other restaurants are already inquiring, Jennifer warns. This moment won't last. Timing matters. Elena asks for time to think, promising an answer by Friday. As Marco walks her to the elevator, his confusion is palpable. This is life-changing money, security, a chance to perform again. Why isn't she jumping at it? Because I've already lost one career by letting other people define what I'm worth. I'm not sure I want to lose another, Elena tells him as the elevator doors close. She walks from Midtown to Lincoln Center, needing movement to process. The November air bites at her skin. Welcome discomfort, reminder of a body that can feel and choose and resist. She finds herself at the Metropolitan Opera House, its massive facade familiar from countless dreams. Through the glass, the Chagall murals explode with color and imagination. She had stood here years ago, newly arrived in New York, imagining herself on that stage, her voice filling that hallowed space. The dream seemed possible then. Now it feels like another lifetime, something that happened to someone else. Her phone reminds her of tomorrow's meeting with Catherine Reeves, the journalist. Another conversation that will shape what comes next. Another choice between visibility and safety, between who she was and who she might become. Elena walks without destination through neighborhoods where she's waited tables, past buildings where she's auditioned for jobs requiring no skill beyond showing up. She passes concert halls and dive bars, coffee shops full of aspiring artists waiting for their moment. Everyone in this city waits for their break, their chance to become who they traveled here to find. Elena stopped waiting 3 years ago, accepting that her moment had passed. But now, unwillingly, she's been dragged back into possibility, and possibility terrifies her in ways resignation never did. In Central Park, sitting by the pond, her phone rings. Dr. Patricia Huang from the Met wants to discuss the accessibility initiative. They schedule Friday morning at 10. After hanging up, Elena tallies her commitments. Friday morning at the Met, Friday afternoon an answer due to Bellinote, tomorrow the journalist, and twice weekly starting Monday, teaching kids who've never heard opera.
Her life has become a negotiation with multiple futures, each demanding different pieces of her. She can't say yes to everything, but doesn't know how to say no when each represents something she needs: money, legitimacy, purpose, connection. She opens her phone and writes, "What I know. I can still sing. I want to sing for people who listen, not people who eat. I need money to survive, but I need meaning to live." Teaching those kids felt right in a way nothing else has in 3 years. I'm tired of hiding. I'm terrified of being visible. Both things are true. It isn't wisdom, but it's honest. That evening at Bellinote feels surreal. The restaurant looks identical, but the atmosphere has shifted. Other servers watch her with new awareness, curiosity, envy, uncertainty about interacting with someone famous between shifts. Customers who never looked at her now study her as she takes orders. She hears whispers. Is that her? Should we ask her to sing? At a different couple occupying table 7, where the elderly couple sat Friday, the woman stops Elena. Are you the one who sang from the video? When Elena confirms, the woman's eyes brighten. It was beautiful. You reminded me why I fell in love with opera when I was young. Something loosens in Elena's chest. Throughout the evening, people ask if she'll perform again. Her answer, I don't know yet,
begins feeling less like uncertainty and more like possibility. She doesn't know, but that means the future isn't written, isn't determined, isn't closed. James found her at the server station. "How are you holding up?" She admits it's strange being seen differently. "Because they actually see you now," he replies. "Before, you were invisible, just the person bringing food. Now you're human, with a story." We're halfway through Elena's incredible journey. If this story is resonating with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear about second chances. Your engagement helps stories like this reach more people. I'm not sure I like being a story. Too late for that. The question is what story you want to tell. Walking home, the city looks different. Or maybe she's different and the city remains indifferent, containing multitudes of stories it will never notice. In her apartment's contemplative silence, Elena opens her laptop. The video has reached 5 million views. Someone created a Wikipedia page about her, piecing together her history from old performance records. Reading about herself in third person feels dislocating. The comments have evolved beyond initial reactions into larger debates. Classical music accessibility, treatment of service workers, disability visibility in performance arts, economics of artistic careers. Her 3-minute performance has catalyzed conversations she never intended to start. One comment strikes her. "This is what happens when we assume people are only what we see them doing in the moment. How many geniuses are we overlooking because they're serving our coffee or driving our Ubers? How much beauty are we missing because we don't bother to look?" She reads it 3 times, feeling both seen and exposed. The world is full of people carrying gifts they can't share, dreams they can't pursue, talents with nowhere to land. She'd been one of them for 3 years, her invisibility broken by chance and cruelty and someone's camera phone. She begins writing. Not an email, but a manifesto for herself. "For 3 years, I have been hiding. I told myself I was surviving, but really I was hiding. From my past, my potential, the possibility of being hurt again. Friday night, I was forced out of hiding. In singing, I discovered something. Visibility is terrifying, but invisibility is worse. Invisibility is a kind of death. The death of the self that matters, the self that creates and connects and contributes." She continues, "I don't know what comes next, but I know this, I will not hide anymore. I will not compress myself into shapes that feel safe but suffocate. I will not let fear of failure prevent me from attempting success. My voice is still here. My hand shakes, but my voice is still here, and that has to mean something." That night, Elena dreams of singing. Not anxious dreams where her voice fails, but simple dreams of music. Her voice moving through melody, turning breath into beauty. She wakes Wednesday morning still feeling the vibration in her chest, the phantom sensation of sound. She dresses carefully for Catherine Reeves. Jeans and a nice sweater. Approachable rather than performative. She arrives at Café Lucia 20 minutes early. At exactly 2 o'clock, Catherine appears. 50s, gray-streaked hair, intelligent eyes behind frameless glasses, the comfortable confidence of someone who's earned authority through decades of work. Elena stands to meet her, ready for whatever conversation comes next, no longer hiding, but not yet certain who she's choosing to become. Thanks for following Elena's story to the end. If her journey moved you, please like this video, share it with others who might need to hear about second chances. Your engagement helps stories like this reach more people.